This is a training session regarding selecting accounts payable invoices for payment. After open accounts payable invoices have been posted, they reside in the accounts payable invoice file, where they are aged until we select them for payment and print checks. In order to select invoices for payment, we choose Select Invoices for Payment from the Accounts Payable menu. The following screen comes into view. This is the screen we use to select invoices for payment. In the list box on the screen are shown all the invoices which are currently open. Information about each invoice includes the record number, the vendor number and name, the invoice number and due date, and the amount remaining to be paid on the invoice. We can view these invoices ordered by vendor number, by vendor name, by due date, by job, by record number, or by discount date. Regardless of which sort option we select, all the open invoices will be listed. We can limit the number of invoices listed by clicking on the Change Limits button. Here we can limit our invoices to a certain range of due dates or discount expiration dates. We can also limit them by vendor or by job or by invoice type. If we select to limit our invoices, the system will display only the invoices within our chosen limits in the list box. We can clear the limits by clicking on the Clear Limits button, and then all the open invoices will once again be displayed. In order to quickly select an invoice for payment, we have three choices. We can select the invoice for payment by check using the Select button. We can select an invoice as having been paid by handwritten check or credit card using this button. Or we can select the invoice for payment by electronic funds transfer, or EFT, using this button. To select an invoice for payment by check, we highlight the invoice and click the Select button. The system then selects this invoice to be paid in full by printed check during our next check run. Notice that when we select an invoice for payment, a blue square appears in the left-hand column on the browse. To deselect the invoice, click the Deselect button. To select the invoices having been paid by handwritten check or credit card, we highlight the invoice and click the Hand Check Credit Card button. The system then allows us to select whether the invoice was paid with a check or by a credit card. If handwritten check is selected, we can enter the check number we used to pay for the invoice, along with the check date and the checking account. If credit card is selected, we can enter the payment date and the credit card account number. To select the invoice for payment by electronic funds transfer, use this EFT button. Invoices can only be selected for payment by EFT if the vendor has had bank transfer information entered through vendor entry. Vendors who have been set up in this manner will have a lightning bolt next to their vendor name in this column. When we click the EFT button, the highlighted invoice will be selected for payment by EFT, and a lightning bolt icon will appear in the tagging column. When payments are processed, a payment voucher will be printed instead of a check. This voucher can be mailed or emailed to the vendor. The system will create an ACH text file that can be sent to your bank so they can transfer the funds. There are other options for selecting invoices for payment. For example, we can select all the invoices in the current list for payment by clicking the Select All button. The system will select all the invoices for payment in full and redisplay them with a blue square in the payment box. We can deselect all these invoices for payment by clicking the Deselect All button. We can select a range of invoices for payment by check by first highlighting one invoice. This will be the first in our range. Now we hold down the Shift key and click on the last invoice in our range. All the invoices in between the first and last will be selected for payment. The last option we have for selecting invoices for payment is the Partial Payments Other Options button. If we highlight an invoice and click on this button, the following screen will appear. This screen gives us more information about the invoice, including the number, the invoice date, the amount, and the cost distribution. In the case of a trade invoice, the distribution will include the accounts, cost codes, equipment, or inventory the invoice line items were charged to. In the case of a subcontract invoice, the distribution will be a small subcontract summary. We can then click on the Change Pending Payment button to use more options in selecting our invoice for payment. The default, of course, is to pay our invoice in full. In this box is shown the full amount that will be paid. In this box is a list of our invoice line items and the amount that will be paid on each line item. If we wish to make a partial payment on the invoice, we can uncheck the Pay in Full box and type in the dollar amount we wish to pay. We then need to apportion our payment among the invoice line items at the bottom of the screen. In order to change the amount that shows up in this Amount to Pay column for any one line item, we highlight the line item, click on the Pay Highlighted Item button, and change, if necessary, the amount to be paid. Before we can select the OK button, the total at the bottom of the Amount to Pay column must match our Amount to be Paid figure at the top of the screen. At this point, we can select the invoice for payment by EFT, or as having been paid by handwritten check or by credit card. We can also select a co-payee. If this check needs to be payable to our vendor plus a second co-payee, use these fields to indicate who the co-payee will be. Select a co-payee from the vendor file. Once we have selected our payment strategy, we click on the OK button and the system brings us back to the Invoice Information screen. We can then select OK and the system will indicate that our invoice has been selected for payment. If we selected an invoice for partial payment, a blue triangle will appear in the selected box. Once we have selected our invoices for payment, we click the Close button. If we have selected any invoices as having been paid by handwritten check or credit card, the system will remind us that in order to finalize those payments, we must go to the Print Checks Post Hand Payments option in the Accounts Payable menu. There, we can print the checks that have been selected for payment and post the payments of the invoices we have selected as having been paid by handwritten check or credit card. For more information about printing checks, refer to the training session on printing accounts payable checks. And this concludes this training session on selecting accounts payable invoices for payment.